Hello friends and welcome to the latest episode of the Enki Jazz podcast. It is my very great pleasure to be chatting today to the incredible Nat Birchall, one of the UK's hidden jazz treasures locked away in Lancashire. So we're very grateful to him for spending the time to chat to us today. For those of you who do not know Nat, please go and check out his very extensive discography. He's got some incredible albums out there. He is a bearer of the flame of Coltrane and Pharoah Sanders and has made some incredibly beautiful music. So please do go and check that out. Of course, head over to our Patreon and check out all of the rest of our podcasts, our concerts, and our silent film and improvised soundtrack series while you're there. We'd love to see you. Take care and enjoy the interview with Nat Birchall. Hello and welcome to the Enki Jazz podcast. Nat, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. How have you been keeping in these last few months of new normality, or however you want to phrase it?
Well, the great pause, I think, is a great way of describing it. For someone did great pause, everything was just, despite everything that's been going on, I actually quite liked it, which might sound perverse, but it was nice to just stop, stop for a while, leave the car outside for weeks or months instead of a couple of days if I was lucky.
Yeah. But
no, it's been great. I've been very busy, I actually ended up recording an album at home. And so I've been very, very busy, despite the situation.
Yeah.
I don't actually do many gigs nowadays, but this year started off really well. I got lots of gigs coming in London and Greece and Italy, and of course we all lost our work. Yeah. So I thought I need to make some money to live on.
Yeah.
So I had the idea of recording a solo saxophone album and just selling it as a download.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't need to worry about if I pressed CDs or vinyl, whether the post offices would be open to, or the pressing plants would be open, or any of that, because this was right at the start of lockdown where no one knew what was happening. And at that time, the post offices in France were closed. So. But long story short, I ended up buying a little synthesizer and recording this album and playing bass and drums and all kinds of stuff on it. It was a real adventure.
Yeah.
So that kept me sane completely.
Brilliant.
I was able to do it without interruption. I didn't have to go here and go there, pick up the kids from school or what have you. I could just stay here all day and night and just get on with it. So it was perfect, So I'm all for it,
Yeah.
I think you do this without the virus. Get rid of the virus, but just keep things like this.
I think you're certainly not alone in that feeling of
Yeah, quite a few people have said it. So I know there are some people who really struggle with it. They don't have. It depends on what your regular focus is, and I know a lot of people, musicians, their whole focus is gigs. They just do gigs all the time, and when that's taken away, it's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
So I anyway, that was my thing that I decided to do.
And so that's now available, I presume.
Well, it's sold out, actually.
It's sold out.
It's sold out, yeah, amazing. And it's sold out. So I'm on with the next one. I've been mixing. So I've mixed, excuse me, all my albums that I've done, I've sat with the engineer and we've mixed them together. But I don't know about the knobs and things. I have a vague idea, but I'm not very technologically minded. And in order to learn something, I have to do it on a day-to-day basis, really. And then I will understand it. I'm not very good at academic learning. So if someone says, this is how you record, this is what you do, unless I actively do it day after day, I won't learn it. So I had to, when I decided to record this album, I bought Reaper, the digital audio workstation, and a microphone and a stand. And I remembered this particular plugin that I used with this engineer years ago to master an album. I bought this plugin and bought this and that, and I just got my head stuck into it and learned how to do it. So the next thing I did was just a couple of weeks ago is I have some music that we recorded in Greece a couple of years ago in Athens from a concert. So I had to go mixing that and then mastering that. And it takes me a long time because I don't really know what I'm doing. And I'm just, but I'm really enjoying learning it. I'm really enjoying finding out how to make these things work. When you have a microphone in the gig that's picked up all the other instruments, and you're trying to find the frequencies and EQ it so these other frequencies that you don't want aren't in that channel, and then try and balance the sounds, etc., etc. So I'm really enjoying doing that, and that's again, that's something that's keeping me sane, and I'm really trying to do that as much as possible. So I'm learning, while I've been in lockdown, I've basically taught myself how to record, how to mix, how to master, and to use all this stuff which I've never used before. So
brilliant.
It's been fantastic. I'm not complaining at all.
Do you think, being now a self-trained sound engineer, is it impacting at all on how you listen to music? I read something recently about how musicians are often far less critical of the quality of sound recording, and I'm not saying this is you at all, but often musicians, because they're listening more for the content of the music rather than the specifics of the quality of the sound you're receiving, whereas an untrained musician, a public consumer, is far more concerned with the quality of the audio and how that's being received, because they're not aware, their brain isn't processing, the harmony or the interaction of, the bass player and the bass drum. They're not going through those processes. Have you found your ear tweaking towards certain things when you're listening?
No, is a short answer. No, but there are very different ways to listen to things. You think about listening to a recording, and regardless of who you are, whether you're a musician or a music fan or what have you, you can hear the music in its emotional effect that you respond to, and you can listen to it in an analytical way. The way, are they playing in time and in tune and together, and is the bass player listening to the drummer or what have you? And you can listen to the recording, but even you can divide all those up again. Like the recording, for instance, it might be a rough recording. It might be done on 4 tracks or something, but the balance of the instruments might be good, and the music might come across. It may be a very musical recording. You can have a very technical recording done in a 16, 24, whatever track studio, where everything's recorded perfectly, but the music doesn't seem to come across. So everything is very complex. And I tend not to listen to music in an analytical way. I tend to listen like I always did listen, which is I just hear the music. I know most jazz musicians listen, and they listen for the harmony, and they listen for what have you. I tend not to listen that way. I listen to the emotional effect of the music, which is, to me, that's what it's all about. That's what attracted me to music in the first place. And that's what got me into playing music. I listened to music for 7 or 8 years in a kind of serious way until I got the saxophone.
Right.
So I was 21 when I got the saxophone. I didn't do music at school. I'm not from a musical background whatsoever. Yeah. But I was deeply into music. I was into Jamaican music. When I very first started to listen to music, when I was sort of 13 or something like that, I would listen to whatever was on TV or on the radio. But I got into Jamaican music when I was 14, I think. And I got very deeply into it. And so by the time I got the saxophone, I had a couple of jazz records, but I then started to buy and borrow and listen to jazz all the time. So I was still listening as a listener. I mean, I only became aware of this concept of, and I had lessons from a local jazz musician for a couple of years, but I didn't really have any serious lessons. He wouldn't tell me anything about chords, for instance, or harmony, or even scales. So for 15 years, I just played by ear. and all I knew was major scales, 12 major scales and 12 Dorian modes. That's all I knew. I knew nothing at all. So up to that point, I played purely by ear. And sometime in that first 15 years, I remember meeting people who were playing, but they were playing from this other position, this position of, we know what the harmony is and we know what we can play on this harmony. But sometimes to me, the music didn't have any emotional effect on it.
Yeah.
So, and when I started to study after 15 years, I did this course, this HND jazz course, where I really got my head down and studied chords and harmony. And after I'd done that for 1 year, after the first year, I couldn't play the way I used to anymore. I couldn't play without thinking it's a C7. I can play this or I can play that. And I just couldn't really play anymore. And it took me 2 or 3 years to work through all that until I could go back to playing by ear again. So now I can sort of play in a conscious way, thinking about the harmony, or I can play in the subconscious way, not thinking about anything. And that way, the subconscious, where you're not thinking about harmony or the chords, etc., that is more akin to a listener who doesn't know anything about music theory, because they just listen to the music.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to do. I just listen to the music as I play it. So, sorry, it's a very long answer to a simple question, but there's nothing is simple, I've found, in life or music or anything. Everything is very complex. It's like fractals, the closer you look, the more you see. Everything just keeps. The thing about listening to recordings is, I mean, when I did start to record my own stuff and you mix with the engineer, then when I would listen to music later that day or the next day, I would hear things that I hadn't been aware of before, like the engineer faded that microphone out when the guy stopped soloing, or you can hear the piano pedal at that point, etc. You start to hear these things that you didn't notice before. But I've always been pretty aware of recording and recording quality, and whether it's mono or stereo, which seems very basic, or whether there's natural room reverb, or whether it's etc. And in the 80s, there was a lot of the digital thing came along with digital recording. It had been around before then, but since the 70s, but it seemed to get very very clinical, the sound, and it lost some of the musicality, lost some of the soul and the sound to me. And I think over time they learned how to use that technology better until it sounds, most of the time when I hear it sounds great today. But I still gravitate to to what I believe is more natural sounding, the sound of tape and valves, even though I don't record that way here because I don't have it. But that there's a sort of default sound that you get when you use valve equipment and when you use tape, analog sounds. You get a default, natural, warm sound, which seems closer to me to the actual sound of the instrument, to the actual sound of the musician. And you can record digitally, but I think you have to be careful not to let that dictate the sound that you end up with.
Yeah.
Because in the same way that analog and valves, etc., have a default sound, digital recording has a default sound, which is like a cleaner, brighter sound.
Yeah.
So I try and make everything sound as warm and as natural as possible. And that comes from listening for years before I was a musician. So that whole you really opened a can of worms by your question. I'm sorry. But, yeah, I don't. And everyone, there's a certain thing that I hear when I hear people play, and especially saxophone players, because it's my instrument. It's like I can hear the reason why they're playing. I can hear the intention behind the notes, behind the sound. The saxophone is very, like a friend of mine says, the tone, it doesn't lie. That is, it says everything. The tone reveals everything about you, about your intention, about why you're playing the first place, why you played that note, why you're playing your song that way, everything. It's a very expressive instrument.
Certainly.
So you can hear, some people play for a particular reason. I try and play. I've tried to make my music to have the same effect as the music that made me play in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
The sounds of these guys, these musicians I used to listen to and still do listen to, because their sounds moved me, their sounds spoke to me. So I try and play not with their sound, but with the same emotional effect, let's say. And it's the same with recordings, that I try and make the recording sound, or make the recordings work in a similar way. I've gone down so many wrong streets in the past with my own playing, my own sound, my own recordings, my own etc. And after a while, you realize it's not the right way. You go back and carry on the way you were going. So it's not like I've always done the right thing, but I've learned that ultimately, in order for my music to work the way I want it to work, it has to be made in that same way as the classic things that I listened to were made.
And when you say the classic things that you listen to, as you already said yourself earlier on, without wanting to put words in your mouth, but perhaps your first love was the music of Jamaica, and that really switched you on to music in a big way. And then possibly a bit later on was the Coltrane, Pharoah Sanders sort of sound world. So when you say the music that first turned you on, are you more thinking of the Jamaican thing or the jazz thing or just anything?
Well, it's the Jamaican thing. I bought other things. I used to listen to Bob Dylan, used to listen to Leonard Cohen, Frank Zappa, punk when that came out. I bought some things like that, but they never really. After a while, they didn't have any lasting effect on me. But the music that really meant and still means a lot to me is Jamaican music, and especially the horn players. There are some great musicians, Cedric Brooks, Tommy McCook, Roland Alfonso, saxophone players, Don Drummond, Vin Gordon. There's some fantastic horn players. And the first jazz album I bought, which is in 1978, was Blue Train, John Coltrane. And what happened was I used to go to the local record shop and buy whatever reggae I could find. And one day I was in there and there was no new reggae, but there was this John Coltrane Blue Train. And I just read about him recently in this music magazine. And the article said something like, when you hear a tenor saxophone solo in like Afrobeat or something like this, this is where the concept is coming from. It's coming from this guy, John Coltrane. So I thought, oh, this looks interesting. I'll buy this. So, but when I heard it, that's the first time I heard John Coltrane. I thought this is the same kind of tenor sound that Tommy McCook has, that Cedric Brooks has, because they were fans of John Coltrane. I discovered later. But to me, that was the sound. That was the tenor saxophone sound. I'd seen, on Top of the Pops, you see, who was there? There's people like Roxy Music, who had that guy, Andy Mackay, is it? And Roy Wood and Wizard, he used to have two tenor saxophone playing with a very growly sound, But that wasn't like the Jamaican horn players, and it wasn't like John Coltrane. So when I heard Coltrane, it sort of rang a bell. It was the same, like you said, the same sound world. So that, and when I started to play saxophone, that was the sound that was in my head. And as you know, as a saxophone player, the sound, the biggest influence on the sound is what you hear in your head, what you imagine this instrument sounds like. So that is I used to teach for many, many years. I've not taught for a couple of years now. When I used to teach and you have beginners and they would come along and play something, you can usually tell what the reference point is for the saxophone because they will try and play with that kind of inflection. So that was the sound that was in my head. So that kind of, and I did try to sort of come away from it over the years because there was no one else doing that kind of music. And I also fell into the trap of your music should sound of its time. It should be of now. Mm-hmm. So I got into fusion for a while.
Yeah,
that's another story. But and then
one thing I do want to ask you about at some point, we can come back to it later, is the phrase Turkish fusion kept coming up when I was looking. I do want to kick back.
Rock fusion. Well, I'll talk about that. I played with I don't even know, there's a famous Turkish drummer and percussionist called Okay Tennis. He had a group in the 60s, 70s with Johnny Diani and Don Cherry.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It was called, what was it called? I forget. But he's still playing now. But he has a lesser known brother called Akai, who lives in Lancashire.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So through some friends, they said he had a group, and Gary Boyle, the guitarist, was playing in the group, and a bass player who was a friend of mine who I've been playing with. And they said he was looking for a saxophone player. So long story short, I started to play in his band, and we played. His brother Okai had this group called Oriental Wind, and they did quite a few albums on Sonnets and labels like this, European labels, in the early 70s. And they would play, it was the same things that we played. There were Turkish folk songs that had been sort of arranged for kind of jazz rhythm, jazz rhythmic. And it was electric bass and electric guitar, so it was very, sort of jazz rock Turkish fusion. That's what it was, It was, so that's where Turkish jazz fusion came up, So that was that. Sorry, go on.
No, sorry to have interrupted your train of thought before. But yeah, I'm looking forward to checking that out. So how did, at what point, obviously 21's and you picked up the saxophone. At that point, had you already started to soak up Coltrane and Pharoah Sanders, or did that still come later on?
Well, like I said, I bought Blue Train.
Oh, so yeah.
77 or 78, which is a year or two before I started playing. And I bought a couple of Charlie Parker LPs, the dial things.
Yeah.
And I used to listen to those, and it was just, especially the Charlie Parkers. Coming from Jamaican music, which is very, very slow tempo.
Yeah.
It's played with a kind of double time feel, but even the double time feel is pretty slow compared to bebop. So it was just, I could hear the ballads. The Gypsy was on there, and Embraceable You on the Charlie Parker. And I could hear that and think, wow, yeah, that sounds great. But all the rest is just like way over my head. So I had those 2 or 3 jazz albums. But when I got the saxophone, I had this guitar. I bought a guitar from my uncle a few years before. He brought it back from a holiday in Spain, and he sold it to me for £2. And like I tell people, it used to make my fingers bleed. It wasn't a very good instrument. And I used to play like country blues and Bob Dylan songs and stuff. But I didn't really connect with it. But then I was in this local record shop one day, and in the back of the shop there's like a stock room, and I could see this saxophone lying there. And I asked him about it, and he said it's one he used to play when he was a kid. He was going to put it in the window for display. So I ended up buying it off him for £20. And it turned out it was a 1920s alto, very ancient alto. And I had that, but I took it home. I think I got a mouthpiece there was no mouthpiece. I went to a shop and took it in, and they kind of laughed at me. They said, it needs new pads. I bought a set of pads and changed the pads, would you believe? I imagine it leaked quite a bit. And I bought a mouthpiece and some reeds. And anyway, there's something about the instrument when I played it that I really connected with. This is speaking to me where the guitar didn't. So I got a little money together, borrowed some money and got some money, and I bought an old Con alto. And the shop put me in touch with this jazz musician, and I went along to have some lessons. And I just, that was, I was serious about it. I was and I wasn't, because there was no way I was imagining I was going to be a musician. But I was such a music lover. I was so deeply into the music that I just wanted to play these sounds.
Yeah.
And first it was just I wanted to play a little bit, and then it was, I'd like to be able to play a bit more, and then so it just get, how it is. It just takes over your life bit by bit, and I just never put it down. I never put it down. That was it. I just kept playing. Getting more and more serious about it all the time, but I've forgotten what your original question was. I'm sorry.
Oh,
sorry. At that time, when I got the saxophone, I went to have lessons, the decent saxophone. That's when I started to get more jazz. I would go to the library and borrow LPs and tape them, listen to all the jazz radio. I used to tape the radio programs. Peter Clayton was one of the guys on Radio 3. And I had this Ghetto Blaster double cassette deck, and I would tape it on one deck and then copy all the ones I liked onto another tape and keep them.
Yeah.
And then I would go and buy records. Back then, a lot of these jazz records that go for hundreds of pounds, you'd be able to get them for a couple of quid back in the day. There were certain shops you could get in Manchester. You could get American LPs for, £1, £2, whatever. So I would just go and, buy things on the Impulse label, Pharoah Sanders, Dewey Redman, all kinds of people, Coltrane, and just take them home. Just buy it. You don't know until you've taken it home whether you like it or not.
Yeah,
So it's a continual process of discovery, listening to the radio, going to the library, reading the magazines and the books, buying records. And so it was just, I immediately entered this big world of jazz. So it wasn't a gradual thing. I had Blue Train and a couple of Charlie Parker LPs, and then it was like the next day, everything was...
Brilliant. My first 2 jazz albums, I'd been playing the saxophone for a while. My mother was really keen for me to play some music, so I'm eternally grateful to her for that. I'd gone off it after playing for a few years just at school and whatever, and the saxophone was sitting covering dust a little bit, and she thought, we spent all this money, we need to do something to get this this boy motivated. And she not a jazz fan, but she knew that the names Charlie Parker and John Coltrane were where you should go.
Yeah.
Went into a shop and she got a compilation of a double CD of a ton of Parker, and then a John Coltrane. It was like a semi-bootleg version of a live concert, live in '64.
Oh.
And so I think I was probably 11 or something like that, and and these things came home, and Parker went on, and I went, oh yeah, a bit like yourself, there's a lot of information to process there, but it all sounds quite and then this Coltrane went on as a 35-minute long version of impressions to kick off. Far too much. I unplugged, and it took me a few years to come back to the Coltrane afterwards. But,
I used to do that. I used to go and buy Coltrane albums, and I bought Meditations very early on, and I thought, I'll come back to that one.
Yeah.
Now I listen to it; it just sounds every day. I did that with so many albums. Even Love Supreme, when I bought that, that's not so out there, but it was obviously a very deep statement.
Yeah.
And it was probably a little bit too intense for me. I could hear this thing was going on. It's really full of this heavy intent is a good way, I think, to put it. It's like there's so much meaning in that music. It's like, like I said, you can't process it all at once. So even that, I used to listen to now and again and put it back for more. It's not exactly easy listening, but you know what I mean. Something's a little more palatable to your ears, and especially once you're a musician, you do try to understand it on some kind of level. Try and follow the line of the soloist. You try and follow the story, and sometimes the story is very convoluted, and I'm not sure what he's saying here. So yeah, I think we all do that to some extent. But I'm quite different to most musicians, I think, in that I started very late and I had done a lot of serious listening before I started. So I think I had even though I didn't have I had a very strange ear. I can't even tell sometimes the difference between major or minor. I have to think about it because I don't hear that. I only hear the emotional content.
Yeah.
Like I said, when I started to study properly, that disappeared, and I became a very analytical listener. But to me, my playing wasn't worth a damn then. So I thought, you can't have this. I'd rather not know what's going on. So like I said, after a couple of years, I got to the point where I could switch from one to the other. I can listen in an analytical way, or I can listen, to me, is the proper way. Because I don't want to, I think I've been guilty in the past of, I used to listen to music and think, this is great, how come more people aren't into this? And I used to think, am I into this because I'm a saxophone player, because I'm a jazz musician? Am I appreciating it because I play jazz and this is what this is? And the thing about John Coltrane, one of the many things about him, is that he transcended the complexity of his music, either the harmonic and later the melodic and rhythmic complexity of his music. He transcended that and still told the story. Even with giant steps, I can't hardly stand to listen to anyone playing giant steps. I used to play it in the set years ago. I ended up coming to the conclusion that there's only Train can play that song because it's to do with the way his mind works. Our minds we all have different minds, and he had a very complex mind. I think mine's very basic, very simple, and even though I could play that song, it's not really my character to play that kind of music, even though I used to do that. My path lies somewhere else. So I think part of the journey has been learning about that, and learning because I used to try and play all these different types of jazz and play all the different changes and all the standards and blues and fusion and Coltrane changes and playing in 9/8 and 7/8 and all this stuff. Because I'm a professional jazz musician, I should be able to do that and I should do it. But that's not really where it's at. Where it's at is finding your voice and your direction. That's, it's taken me a long time because, like I say, I fall into these different traps and all that. My music should be now, so what? I should be making music with a computer or something. But that's not where it's at. It's about what I discovered is, for myself, I should try and make my music sound timeless rather than of its time. And timeless music, that's why when if you listen to a good recording of Charlie Parker, like the Verve stuff, the quartet that could have been recorded yesterday, the music doesn't sound like it's from the 50s. It sounds like it could have been recorded yesterday, really. And the same with Train, Duke Ellington, everybody. Robert Johnson. Don't know if you listen to Robert Johnson, but they did a remaster of his 78s a few years ago. And I listened to a lot of country blues before I was a musician. And the Robert Johnson ones were recorded in a very primitive way and only existed on beat up on 78s. But a few years ago, some guy invented this way of getting more information, musical information, and some other guy did the sound, the noise reduction, etc. And I bought this CD, and I couldn't believe the sound. It was absolutely incredible. Really like it was recorded recently. I mean, sometimes you hear the sound of the needle on the 78 or whatever, but honestly, it's incredible. And it sounds, sometimes the only thing that makes something sound of its time is the recording quality or the format that it's been taken from, the source. So this kind of proves to me, this Robert Johnson especially, that still sounds very, there's nothing going on in that music that's from the 30s. It could be, these things, like classical music. No one says that's hundreds of years old. You shouldn't be listening to that. You shouldn't be playing music in that style. But this is like you've got to be careful. I found I have to be careful not to fall into these traps that people say you should be doing this or you shouldn't be doing that. This is the way you should be playing. This is where it's at. You have to find where it's at for yourself.
It feels like the perfect time to play the first track that you've picked out for us. So the first one you picked out is a recording from Greece. and this is called Sacred Dimensions. Is there anything you'd like to say to the audience before they hear it? Who else is on the recording as well? And
oh, well, the group at that time was Adam Fairhall on piano, Nick Blacker on bass, Paul Hessian on drums, and Corey Mwamba on vibes. So this was, I mean, I could talk all day about that gig, you know, that weekend in Greece, but that was the first time in my life where I'd gone somewhere and everyone in the audience had come to hear us play. They knew the music. I mean, there may have been a few people who didn't, but for the most part, everybody came for the music and everybody listened. The actual feeling in the room was just incredible. It was, when you play music, especially if you play jazz, when you improvise, because you're telling this story, if the audience are receptive, you can feel it. If nobody cares, you feel that. It's like when you speak to people, you can tell if they're going, oh yeah, whatever, yeah, they're not listening, or if they're very receptive and they seem to be really concerned with what you're saying. And this was like the perfect audience. So that reflected in the way that we played, as it does. Yeah. And we did 2 nights, and it was the most incredible experience. That was the first time I'd ever been anywhere and not been a hindrance to the evening's proceedings. It was like, we're here for your music. We are here for this. Let's have the music. So it was just, we were welcomed with open arms and with a lot of love, and we could feel it when we played, and I think it comes across in the music. So that's it.
Well, listen, sit back and enjoy Sacred Dimensions. So that was Sacred Dimensions. I wanted to ask you, so as you know, as an aspiring jazz musician, then, or as things progress, the draw for a huge number of people is flock to the city and be in the heart of lots of people and surrounded by the scene, whatever that may mean. And as far as I'm aware, that's very much not been anything you've been particularly interested in engaging with in your life in that way. And you live out in the countryside, and I've read that you're a big lover of the hills, and you can't imagine being away from all of that, which I completely understand. And having been spending the last year doing a master's degree in London, it's fantastic to be around everything, but it's also terrible to be around everything. Comparing yourself with colleagues or people you see on the scene. How have you found the progression for you being in Lancashire and being removed from that? And do you think it's had a bigger impact on your music because of having the solitude in a way, and that time to really form your own strong views rather than maybe be consumed by what is there around you?
Well, to go back to the first part of the question about, there's normally a natural attraction to go to the city where the scene is, get involved in that and to be a part of that and to get more work, etc. I started off without any real aspirations to be a musician in the first place. It was only later on that started to form. And because I'd started late and I had a day job, so I couldn't spend that much time doing it, I did think I should, my original intention was to move to Manchester. But I wasn't, first of all, my life situation wasn't such that I could do that. And the other thing was that I wasn't good enough to do that. So, and then later on when I thought, well, I should go to London instead. When I'm good enough, I will go to London. So I'm still waiting to be good enough to go to London. But also in between, I never did fully move to Manchester because before the opportunity had arisen, I'd gone beyond that anyway. I didn't want to do that anymore. I used to be on the scene in Manchester in like the early 90s. I would go over 2 or 3 times a week and go to jam sessions and met a lot of people. I would do gigs and then play in other people's bands, to a certain amount, to a certain degree. But it took me a while to realize that this isn't really what I want to be doing. This kind of music, it's the same old story that it comes down to, that I seem to be the only person that was into this particular kind of music and wanted to play this particular kind of music. When I first started, to me, jazz was jazz, but people play it differently because there may well be different musics. They play it in a very different way. It's not just a form that you can enter into and just play. There's an awful lot more to it than that. So I learned this over the years, and I learned that, well, even if I did move there, that's not really what I want to do. I don't know anyone there who can play it this kind of way. And a lot of the people I knew who'd moved to London, for instance, seemed to be touring with sort of pop groups and things like this and doing a lot of session work to make ends meet. And I couldn't, there's very, very few people, as you know, who make a living playing jazz. So at some point I determined that, well, I'm never going to make it. To me, making it would be, I didn't have to have a day job. I could just spend all the time doing music, and I may get a gig with someone's band, and we might tour Europe once a year, playing whatever kind of jazz, and that would be making it. I'm still waiting for that to happen. That's not happened. It's not going to happen. So again, it's my own roots. It's partly to do with the directions I've gone in, and partly just to do with it's my destiny. We engineer things to a certain degree in our lives. but to a great degree, we don't have any control over it. A lot of it is, every day we're confronted with a crossroads or a fork in the road, and we have to decide which way we go. And which way we go determines what the next one is and which way we go from there. But a lot of it is, it's just destiny. It's just the way the universe works. We can't, we don't have any control over it. So, I mean, the natural place to go would be New York. That's where the jazz is, or the jazz was, or still is. I believe it still is. There's some amazing music in New York right now. But I would probably sink if I went to London, because I wouldn't be able to. I really struggle doing things that I don't really want to do in my heart.
Yeah.
And it's not just that I can't be bothered doing it. Whatever mechanism it is that allows me to, for instance, play the way I play, it only works in certain situations. And it's not that I don't like this music, so I'm just not going to try. It's really not that. I can try and try and try, and it won't happen, because like I said, the mechanism that makes the music happen is not really anything to do with me or my conscious mind. Mm-hmm. I have this album called Guiding Spirit, and that came about from that what is it that makes me play this way? What is it that makes me want to play this but not want to play that? What is it that makes me want to go to this note rather than that one? So it's like you have a spirit that guides you. Mm-hmm. And this, I really believe that the best music is created when you're not conscious of what you're doing whatsoever. Yeah. And as you know, you can play in a very conscious way. Like I said before, you say, well, this is C7, I can play this, what shall I play? And the opposite extreme is you're not thinking about anything, you're sort of vaguely aware that you're alive maybe, and you're hearing the music happen. Mm-hmm. And we all operate somewhere in between these two extremes, and we may operate within this sort of area of these extremes, and some nights it may be more like this and sometimes it's more like that. Some people are always over here, some people are always over that, but we all have this little area that sort of shifts that we operate in, and I try as much as possible to operate as far that way towards the subconscious, the unknowing, the letting it happen kind of way, and that's when I find I play my best music. Mm-hmm. So if the music doesn't move me to play that way, if I don't feel like the music is happening, then this isn't going to happen. It's going to be over here. And I can't, as much as I admire people who can play in all these different situations, and they can go and do a pop music session or country and western or whatever, I just cannot do that. I just can't. I'm hopeless. And I used to really beat myself up about it, especially when I became professional. I used to think, well, I'm a professional musician. I should be able to play pop music. It's not demanding. And it took me a while to realize that this is the thing. It's this. I read this, I listened to this interview with Charles Lloyd a long time ago on the radio. And he said, I can't remember what the question was, but he said he's not a musician by profession. He's a musician by nature. Mm. And he didn't really elaborate, but I took that to mean that he's not going around being a professional musician and being very efficient at everything. Mm-hmm. It's in his nature to play music a certain way. And I thought, I can relate to that. So I felt better about it. I felt better that this is the way, this is what attracts me to music. I always I had my little tune a day book when I first started, and I would do my new notes and my blah, 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 play whatever it was, God Save the Queen. And after I'd done that for half an hour, I'd just put a record on and I would just play. Mm. Because this was what music was to me. Everyone's playing and you try and play something to fit what's going on. And that is actually the way to play. That's the way I try and play now. But along the way, I fell into this thing of, no, I should know what to play in the C7 and I should make a choice and play that in a conscious way. So I know what I'm doing. But it's better to not know what you're doing. That's how my music works for me when I don't really know. And I did a gig probably 30 years ago. This keyboard player asked me to do, it's the only time I ever saw the guy, met the guy, do a gig, him and bass and drums. And I didn't know any of the songs. And he would say, this one's in G or something. Okay. And then after a couple of tunes, sometimes he wouldn't tell me, he'd just start playing and I'd have to do a solo. Anyway, it got to this point after about 4 or 5 tunes. I said, what key is this in? And he said, I'm not going to tell you because you play better when you don't know what it is. So, and Monk said that, I read that in an interview with Thelonious Monk. He said, don't tell the guys what the chords are. Sometimes a guy will play better solo if he doesn't know what the chords are, because you're just playing by ear. And that's what music is. And obviously we need to understand music. We need to understand how it's put together and how it works, all the fundamentals. And we need to have all the scales and chords, etc., under our fingers so they're all internalized. And it boils down to that thing that Charlie Parker said. First, you learn your instrument, and then you forget it, and you just play. Obviously, there's a world of stuff inside that little statement. But this is really where it's at, that for me, that I try not to, think about the technicalities of what's going on, and just allow the music to happen. That's a discipline in itself, of course, but that's what works for me. That's what works for me. So that's what I work towards all the time. When I practice, I'm practicing in a very conscious way. At least, I'm starting to do something, and as soon as possible, I stop thinking in that conscious way and let the subconscious take over, even if it's something a technical thing that I'm practicing. I discovered that even technical things, you play them better if you're not thinking about where your fingers are going. If you don't think about G to B flat, if you think about the sound or the feeling that sound expresses to you, if you think about that, it comes out. For me, if I think about G to B flat to D to F, I become all fingers and thumbs, or it's never quite the same. I play it, but it doesn't quite sit right. It doesn't really communicate anything. If I think about the sound and the feeling, then it comes out and it seems to be music. That's what I discovered anyway. That's what I try and live by.
Well, it feels very much like it's a good time to delve into our second tune that you've picked out. So this one is from Band on the Wall. And this is Divine Light. Could you tell us again, as before, a little bit about people, the setting, and all the rest, please?
So this lineup of the band it's Adam Fairhold again on piano. He's my right-hand man. I haven't met any piano players like Adam, because he's quite happy playing modal, free, tonal music. Stride, he's amazing stride player. He knows the whole history, he really does. From early country blues, right through. A lot of piano players I used to find, if I did a couple of modal tunes, after 2, they'd be like, can we play something with changes? They don't like the freedom. Or as they see it, playing on one chord, which it isn't. That's not what modal music's about at all. But it's how they see it. I understand, with the piano, it's really a world of harmony. From the European point of view, it's harmony. It's based on harmony. So you have to really learn that as a piano player, and learn about chord changes and substitutions, and you deal with harmony. And it can be very difficult for them to let go of that and say, well, we're just going to put that to the side, and we just got these 7 notes plus the other 5. So it's a different concept to a lot of piano players. But Adam, he's completely fine with everything, and he's such a beautiful player. Anyway, the rest of the band is, I think it's Michael Barden on bass, who's a really fantastic bass player, one of the best I've played. And 2 drummers, Johnny Hunter and Andy Hay. I always like the idea of 2 drummers and 2 bass players. You get a certain energy and this kind of polyrhythmic thing going on. And if you get the right drummers, it's very complementary. It's not a battle. It's not like having Buddy Rich and Ginger Baker fighting it out. They just make beautiful music, So, so that was the band at that particular gig,
Fantastic. So this is Divine Light. Enjoy. Well, so that was Divine Light. Thank you very much. What are your plans coming up now? Obviously, there's been a hiatus on life of music for most people. It's great to hear, obviously, that you've been productive and proactive, and been in the right mind frame to be so as well in the last few months. Coming up, who knows when we'll be back to performing with groups again. Have you got projects in mind? Have you got another album brewing? Have you got a group in mind? Because your lineups have almost always included Adam, as far as I can see, over the last few years. But bass players and drummers, you've had a pool of musicians that you work with. What's the next iteration and what's the next thing? And have you thought that far ahead yet?
I tend not to think that far ahead. No, I tend to take each step as it comes, and I do sometimes with the lineup. Sometimes I make a change for various reasons. Well, they're always musical reasons, but sometimes the change is thrust upon me by people who go and play somewhere else, or they're not available for a recording session. Mm-hmm. So I have to get someone else, and then I like the way it sounds with this new person, so I keep them in for a while. So it changes, lineup wise. But this year I did have plans to do an album, and I had the lineup all planned. Usually it's the working band. Mm-hmm. Not that we work very much, but such it is. But this time I had long story short, I had a lot of health problems last year, and I ended up in hospital for a few days.
Oh, sorry.
I'm fine. It's just asthma, late onset asthma, which I've never been troubled with, but this is what the problem was. And while it might not be great for a saxophone player to have asthma, it's actually great for an asthmatic to play the saxophone because it's really good exercise for your lungs. So I'm not complaining. But while I was there laid up doing nothing for 5 days, I sort of had a thought of what to do this year. Mm-hmm. And of course, all that went out of the window. But I did have this idea of a lineup for an album and started to think about songs. I started to write some songs for it. So that's still on hold. Mm-hmm. And I'm not making any plans. I'm not booking the studio just yet. We'll just have to wait and see. I do plan on doing more solo recording here. Mm. When I get the time to get back to that, I released the album that I recorded at home, Mysticism of Sound. I was really very, very busy packing and shipping that. And then we released, I do these reggae albums with Al Breadwinner. We had a new one. It's not out officially for another week or so, but it got delivered early on Friday. So I've been packing all the pre-orders for that. Tomorrow I've got to do shop orders. So I'm very busy doing all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I was mixing an album of music that we recorded in Greece, in Athens. We did a few concerts, and on the third night, 2 Greek musicians played with us. Haris Lambrakis, who's a ney playing the end-blown flute. Yeah. And Nikos Sidero Kastritis, who's a fantastic drummer, amazing drummer. And they joined us, so we had 2 drummers again. And we recorded the whole set, and we played some of their tunes and some of our tunes. So I was mixing the music for that. So I'm hoping to get that album out next.
Brilliant.
And then another solo one. I mean, if this terrible virus dies down, runs its course, eventually, hopefully, can think about getting some musicians together and do some recording, do some more concerts. But at the moment, that's not in my focus, not in my viewer, because that's very uncertain. So I know I can deal with, I can keep mixing music that I have, I can keep recording new music. So that's my focus at the moment, that's my plan. And like with the plan I had for this new album, before the virus came along, the plan didn't come to pass. And I tend not to make plans because of that very thing. Yeah. When I make plans, there's always something to come along to prevent it from happening. Mm-hmm. So I tend to take every day as it comes anyway. Just take it step by step and change direction depending, So That's all I can say, really.
Well, I mean that feels like a beautiful, natural place to draw things to a close. So, Nat, thank you so much for your time to joining us and chatting so beautifully about your life and music. And keep well, and we'll hopefully have you at our new venue when things come back.
Yeah, well, that'll be grand. Yeah, thanks very much for the invite. I've enjoyed waffling on. Thank you.
Not at all. Keep well, and we'll see you soon.
Nice one. Take care, Pharoah. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for taking the time to tune in today, and a huge thanks, of course, to Nat for his generosity. It was a pleasure to chat so in depth to him about so many things. Please, of course, as I said, go and check out his albums. They are available via Bandcamp and all of the usual places. Please go and head over to the Enki Jazz Patreon and check out everything we have over there. We hope to see you back next week. Take it easy. Bye bye.